This $1.6 trillion giant has been quietly doubling their Bitcoin holdings every single quarter since the Bitcoin ETFs were launched. Now, with nearly 1.5 billion in Bitcoin ETFs, that's about 0.1% of their holdings. Just how long until they follow the advice of Larry Fink that he's giving to these sovereign wealth funds to allocate 2 or 5% of their total holdings to Bitcoin? Now, let's dive in. Of course, we're talking about Goldman Sachs, the sixth largest bank in the world, has now acquired 1.5 billion, that's billion with a B, folks, Bitcoin from their BlackRock and Fidelity Bitcoin ETFs. So, as my man Vivek is saying, while you're scared, Goldman Sachs has been doubling their holdings and has bought 1.6 billion in ETFs, getting to 2.3 billion, folks. So they continue to double down every single quarter, and we'll get into the receipts here, if you don't believe me, on how Goldman Sachs continues to double down their Bitcoin holdings. But first, just how big is Goldman Sachs, right? So we see here in 2023, Goldman Sachs had $1.6 trillion of assets in total assets under management. And it's a leading global asset manager with 2 trillion in assets under supervision. I'm not quite sure the differences between those, but needless to say, Goldman Sachs is one of the largest banks in the world. Now, with that, right, here's some receipts from back in August 14th of 2024. Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley took stakes in U.S. spot Bitcoin ETFs in Q2, the filing show. So it shows that Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley purchased more than 600 million in that Bitcoin spot ETF during Q2 of last year. Now, with looking at it in later on November 15th, this receipt here, we're looking at 710 million in Bitcoin ETFs, seeing that the Goldman Sachs had added $300 million to its total portfolio in the Bitcoin ETFs, increasing its exposure by 71%. So nearly doubling in that quarter again. And then if we look at even later date, right, we have 418 million in that Bitcoin ETF. So why is Goldman Sachs continuing to double down every single quarter with their Bitcoin holdings, right? We're seeing the holdings and the writings on the wall, right? We're seeing Bitcoin being increasingly adopted by publicly traded companies and by sovereign wealth funds are talking about it now. The U.S. Strategic Reserve is being talked about. It's seemingly on a daily basis. States are talking about it. But as I showed in a previous video, a previous live stream, Larry Fink is extremely bullish on Bitcoin, and he's been talking about the potential of sovereign wealth funds getting into Bitcoin. Now, I did a little quick math, as my friend Luke Mikic loves to say. We're looking at it here. Actually, I didn't do it. I did it on ChatGPT. I cheated a little bit so I don't mess up live on stream like my friend Luke tends to do time and time again. But the bank's total assets under management here, we're assuming 1.5 trillion, which is 1,500 billion. That's billion with a B. So their initial Bitcoin holdings is now at 1.5 billion. So if they double every single quarter, which it seemingly looks like they just about do, and their target is about 2% assets under management, well, look at here. If you're doing it every single quarter, it takes about 4.3 quarters. So just under one, or just over 1 year to get to doubling in nearly that 2% mark, right? So we could see banks rapidly increase their Bitcoin holdings and do it very quickly to get to that 2 to 5%. And on top of all of that, that's one major assumption with all of this, that Bitcoin price is stagnant. It's not changing whatsoever. So let's look at the CAGR of Bitcoin, as my friend Matthew Siegel loves to point out. So the annualized growth rate, the CAGR here, is 147% per year since 2010. The last 10 years, it dropped to 45%. But the last 5 years, we've seen another uptick to about 60% per year. So that those people that are saying that Bitcoin is showing diminishing returns, look at the numbers, folks. Show me the data. The data says it's not necessarily slowing down anytime soon. So we're looking at the best and worst years. Last year, we had a 157% growth rate. So let's say we assume this 60% growth rate. Well, that 4.32 number just decreased rapidly because we see a 60% increase in the price of Bitcoin as they're doubling their holdings. So I think this is all lining up for an extremely bullish 2025 because banks continue to double down on these Bitcoin ETFs. Allowing these products to give access to these bankers is absolutely huge. But the other kicker here, folks, the other kicker is the SAB 121 also got passed, which allows banks to be custodians for Bitcoin. Now, I'm not advocating for any of that, and we'll get into why here in a second, but this means that banks are continually going to be doubling down into their Bitcoin holdings, right? So I lined out the situation of just getting to that 2% number, but Larry Fink also talks about getting all the way up to that 5% number. So how long would that take? Would that take much longer? Well, let's say that would take about 5.64 quarters, folks. So granted, if they want to get to that 2% mark, it's going to take just over a year. Here, it's nearly going to take about a year and a half just to get to that 5% number. That's how quickly that they're adding to this, folks. And that's the difference between that 2 and 5%. It's not much. It's 6-7 months where Goldman Sachs can continually be adding Bitcoin. And when they're adding Bitcoin at such a rapid pace and keep on doubling down, buying more and more purchases of Bitcoin, that is going to rapidly increase the holdings. The FOMO is going to be absolutely insane. And if you look at it here, Goldman Sachs isn't even the largest Bitcoin holder when it comes to banks. They are number 6 on the they're number 6 on the list of total assets under management. So imagine if others follow suit. Imagine if JP Morgan, $3.5 trillion starts to, go through this route, or even Bank of America or Citigroup. These banks that are 5-6 times bigger than Goldman Sachs now getting into Bitcoin, starting to double down and really truly start to buy, right? We're seeing the demand from Bitcoin institutional holders. We're seeing the demand from everybody with this ETFs. And, surprisingly enough, the ETFs have just recently passed Satoshi Nakamoto as the largest holder of Bitcoin. And that happened here recently. So allowing all these ETF products to continue to scoop up Bitcoin. Look, I'm not advocating for that at all. I truly believe the true power of Bitcoin is the ability to hold Bitcoin on your own, not necessarily go and utilize Larry Fink and these other ones, these other ETF products to continue to buy up Bitcoin and continue to scoop up all the corn, so to speak. The true power of Bitcoin is truly to hold it yourself. But I think it's interesting that we're seeing how quickly traditional finance is scooping up all this Bitcoin. They are really looking for it. I mean, the amount of buying that we're seeing here means that the FOMO for Bitcoin has been in traditional finance for years now, right? It seems like everybody has been clamoring for Bitcoin holdings at some point in time. And now we're really truly starting to see it. We're seeing that, the top 10 US bank, we're seeing PNC Bank, Goldman Sachs, every single headline, all these different banks around the globe are truly starting to really get into Bitcoin holdings through these ETF products. Now, the SAB 21 would allow them to potentially be custodians for people. So I think that is going to be very big. And, we're seeing privatized banks, and then soon we're going to start seeing some of these central banks, right? We have the Czech Republic Central Bank, which we talked about in a previous live stream. Now, talk about Bitcoin. We've had other central banks around the globe, central bankers, speak about Bitcoin. Like, what do they think of it? And they need to have some sort of opinion on it at this point. Now, I think that this is absolutely massive that we're seeing the banking industry really start to go into Bitcoin because, we're seeing a lot of custodians need to be able to hold Bitcoin, need to be able to have some access to it. We've got publicly traded companies now buying into Bitcoin. We see, obviously the likes of MicroStrategy now change to Strategy. We see Marathon Digital. We see a lot of these other Bitcoin companies start to come in and really double down on their Bitcoin holdings and continue to hold Bitcoin throughout this time period, right? So if you look at this here, we can look at the publicly traded Bitcoin or the publicly traded Bitcoin companies or publicly traded companies that hold Bitcoin, excuse me, a little bit of a tongue twister, but we're seeing the massive difference between MicroStrategy, now known as Strategy, comparatively to everybody else. It's just not even close at this point, folks. But what we are seeing is that these banks are now starting to scoop up Bitcoin. They're doing it through the ETF products, though, which I think is, very interesting. And I'm not sure if, we'll see a lot of these banks and ETFs like products start to clamor in. But, I did a video yesterday about Donald Trump filing for that Bitcoin ETF. So it seems like everybody is paying attention to the demand that we're seeing for all of these Bitcoin ETF products, right? We're seeing millions and billions of dollars be scooped up every single quarter by these major players, while everybody here is sitting here talking about, hey, we're crab walking along for the Bitcoin price. We're sitting nearly at 97,000, I believe, or 95,000, excuse me. We had a bit of a red candle day. That's not what you like to see, but we're seeing, these Bitcoin holdings really, kind of clamor here. And we're seeing people who are holding Bitcoin and holding it for the long term be bearish for some reason when we're seeing all these banks and major institutional holders really double down and continue to scoop up more Bitcoin. But the moral of the story of this, folks, is don't give your Bitcoin to a Goldman Sachs. Don't give your Bitcoin to all of these guys. Don't buy your Bitcoin through an ETF product. Buy it and store it in self-custody. That's why I've partnered with the Bitcoin Well. They are the number one place in the United States that are strictly non-custodial that can help you buy Bitcoin, send it directly to cold storage. You can even do it in direct deposit. If you want to put in your fiat job, get that direct deposit, put 40, 50, 60% of your paycheck directly into Bitcoin. It'll buy it for you and then send it directly into cold storage. You can do that. And if you're looking at this Bitcoin price saying, hey, Brandon, you're telling me all this bullish news. Why isn't the price pumping? I'm thinking this looks juicy and I want to do a big giant smash buy here. Go to their OTC desk here, Bitcoin Well Infinite, and you could buy 50K purchases or more. They got the best white glove service. I wouldn't send them to you guys if I haven't used them myself. So I've used them to do my big smash buys. So I really encourage you guys all to do the same. And the team over there is absolutely great. So be sure to tell Adam and my friends over at the Bitcoin Well that I sent you and that you're having a great time buying up sats for cheap, because we're looking at Goldman Sachs and some of these others really start to do it, right? They're looking at this Bitcoin price and saying, hey, this is juicy, folks. This is the way to really scoop up more Bitcoin. This is a good buying opportunity. Are we ever going to see Bitcoin underneath that 100K mark ever again? The answer is unknown at this point, but I wouldn't want to risk it here, seeing all this buying pressure that we're seeing from all these major institutions, right? They hold 2.3 billion in that BTF, in that ETF. And, we even have some crazy people in the comments under here saying that they have 98% of their net worth in Bitcoin and they are not scared. So why are you sitting on the sidelines getting scared when you've seen literally, here's the receipts here, folks. You've seen Goldman Sachs double their Bitcoin spot ETFs holdings since the ETFs were launched. We've got 418 million in holdings here. We've got 710 in Q3 of last year. And then now the reports come out that they bought 1.6 billion in Q4, bringing it to a whopping 2.3 billion. That's Billy with a B, folks, not like the goat, but billion worth of Bitcoin here. So I really think that, we're seeing ETF products unlock a new buyer that we've never seen before, right? But as I always say, folks, I don't trust these guys. I always think that there is some sort of other narrative. They're going to be trying to buy more and more Bitcoin. They're trying to custody it for you. They're trying to control as much that as they can for now. But as my man All Night Hider is saying, smoke that like Cheech and Chong. So I appreciate you, man, always coming in the chat and encouraging people to smoke that like, because we're seeing these ETF products really take off here. We're seeing the ETFs jump and banks all over the globe really start to buy Bitcoin. But, it's not just Goldman Sachs. We've got, the likes of JP Morgan. We've got others. Hell, we even got the Bitcoin billionaires here keep on buying up Bitcoin. We got Michael Saylor continuing to buy Bitcoin, Tim Draper. Unfortunately, allegedly 40,000 of his Bitcoin were lost in the Mt. Gox exchange, but we're seeing more and more of that wealth distribution go towards those ETFs, right? So, we're seeing a lot of companies now start to buy Bitcoin, Fidelity being a major holder, but Goldman Sachs is coming up here, and we're seeing some mysterious folks here kind of drive up Bitcoin. We got Mr. 100 and an unknown having 75,000 Bitcoin and 73,000 Bitcoin in a single wallet. That would be a little scary for me, folks, to have that much in there. But I appreciate you guys joining me on a nice late night rip. As my man All Night Hider says, smoke that like Cheech and Chong, and I will catch you guys all at the next one.